Hello everyone, I am Ashit Tiwari and today I am going to describe about the ultrastructure of muscle and its contraction. This contraction theory is also known as the sliding filament theory, which is given by the Huxley and Hansen. As we know that most of the animals show locomotion from one place to another place in search of food, mate and shelter. But how this mechanism happen? Before this mechanism study, we have to know about the muscles. So muscle is a group of muscle tissues which contract together to produce a force. This is a tissue which is contract and produce a force by which contraction is happen. A muscle consists of muscle fibers surrounded by a protective tissue, sarcolemma, and they bundle together to form muscles. So muscles outer covering is known as the sarcolemma. As we know that cell is covered by the plasma membrane, but the muscle is surrounded by the sarcolemma. Muscle cells like neurons can be excited chemically, electrically and mechanically to produce an action potential that is transmitted along their cell membrane. So muscles and neurons both are the excitatory tissues which send the signals to the muscles by the motor neurons, and that signal produces the action potential, and that action potential generate the muscles to contract. Unlike neuron, they respond to stimuli by activating a contractile mechanism. जैसे कि neurons में होता है contraction, same that muscles also is excitatory and contractile mechanism is happen. The contractile protein myosin and the cytoskeleton protein actin are abundant in muscles, where they are the primary structure component that brings about contraction. So muscle is formed by the some proteins like myosin and actin proteins, which are the contractile protein and are the main contractile proteins present in muscles. Some other proteins like tectin, desmosins, tropomyosin, troponin also present in the muscles, which also helps and regulate and structural formations in muscles. So skeletal muscle, all skeletal muscle are composed of numerous fibers ranging from 10 to 18 micrometer in diameter. Each of these fibers is made up of successively smaller subunits. In most skeletal muscle, each fiber extends the entire length of the muscle. Myofibrils are composed of actin and myosin filaments. Each muscle fiber contains several hundred to several thousand myofibrils. Each myofibril is composed of about 1500 adjacent myosin filaments and 3000 actin filaments, which are large polymerized protein molecules that are responsible for the actual muscle contraction. So in the muscles, we can see the 1500 are the myosils filaments and 3000 are the actin filaments. The myosin and actin filaments partially interdigitate and thus cause the myofibril to have alternate light and dark bands. So actin filaments are the thin filaments by which they shows the light color, and myosin are the darker in color and thick in constitutions. Their light bands contain only actin filaments and are called I bands. So light bands, which is also called the actin filaments, are known as the I band because they are isotropic to polarized light. So they are isotropic means they are constitution is same as all over the area, and they can polarize the light from coming any direction of the source. They can polarize the light. The dark band contains myosin filaments as well as the end of the actin filaments, where they overlap the myosin and are called A band because they are anisotropic to polarized light. So dark band is constituted of the myosin filament as well as the end of the actin filaments. They have the overlapping of the half of the actin filament, that is the actin filament, half of the actin filaments, where they overlap the myosin. They overlap the myosin and are called A band. So the myosin is known as the A band because they are anisotropic to polarized light. They are anisotropic, their constitution is irregular in all over the surface, and they can polarize lights. The small projection from the side of the myosin filaments are cross bridges. When the contraction happens, myosin and actin filaments are overlap and form the cross bridges. It is the interaction between these cross bridges and the actin filaments that cause contraction. When the contraction happens, actin slides over the myosin, and that is the contraction. This is the structure of the muscles. Muscles have the microfilaments. These microfilaments are surrounded by the endomysium, and endomysium's several microfilaments bundles are surrounded by the several bundles more and are covered by the perimysium, which is also known as the fasciculi, and different fasciculi are form another bundle, and that bundle is surrounded by the epimysium, and that overall the bundle is known as the muscle. The ends of the actin filaments are attached to so-called Z bands. So actin and myosin arrangement is side by side is known as the Z disc, which is the another type of protein from different to the actin and myosin. So the Z disc, which itself is composed of filamentous protein different from the actin and myosin filaments, passes crosswise across the myofibril and also crosswise from myofibril to myofibril, attaching the myofibril to one another all the way across the muscle fiber. Therefore, the entire muscle fiber has light and dark band, as do the individual myofibril. Due to the arrangement of the actin and myosin, dark and light bands, this is shows the striation in the muscles. That is also known as the striated muscles. The portion of the myofibril or the whole muscle fiber that lies between two successive Z discs is called the sarcomere. The position in between the two Z discs is known as the sarcomere, which is the functional unit of the contraction. When the muscle fiber is contracted, the length of the sarcomere is about 2 micrometer. When the contraction happens, actin slides over the myosin. This sarcomere is shortened. At this length, the actin filament completely overlap the myosin filament, and the tip of the actin filament are just beginning to overlap one another. At this length of the muscle is capable of generating this greatest force of the contraction. This is the arrangement of the filaments, like cross bridges happen in between the myosin and actin, and Z disc is present side by side. The purple filament is the actin microfilaments, and the pink and dark filament is known as the myosin filament. In between the myosin, M line is present, and in between the Z disc, sarcomere is also present. So now, molecular basis of contraction. The process by which the contraction of muscle is brought about is sliding of the thin filament over the thick filament. Like when contraction is happen, thin filament like actin is overlapped to the or slides to the dark thick filament of the myosin. The shortening is not due to changes in the actual length of the thick and thin filament, rather by their increased overlap with the muscle within the muscle cells. So they do not change their length, they actually overlap to each other for their contraction. So the actual length is not changing, but changing in their overlapping. The length of the A band is constant. Always A band is constant means myosin portion is always the fix. It can't be changed. Whereas the Z lines move closer together. The Z lines, the Z lines, when contraction happens, they shorten. When the muscle contract and farther apart when it's relaxed. So when the contraction is happen, the sliding happens, and the contraction happens, the shortening of the Z disc and sarcomere. When they relax, they regain their position. So this is the structure of the filaments arrangement. Z line, I, A bands, which I told you. So in the contraction state, these actin filament has been pulled inward among the myosin filament. When the contraction happens, the actin filament and myosin filaments are overlap or slides to the myosin. So their ends overlap one another to their maximum extent. Also, the Z disc has been pulled of the actin filament up to the ends of the myosin filaments. Muscle contraction occurs by sliding filament mechanism. This is caused by force generated by interaction of the cross bridges from the myosin filament with the actin filament. Under resting condition, these forces are inactive. When the signal is not arriving from the brain, this is in the inactive form, muscle is relaxed. But when an action potential travel from the muscle fiber, this causes the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release large quantity of calcium ion that rapid surrounds the myofibril. The calcium ion is turned activate the force between the myosin and actin filament. The contraction begins, but energy is needed for the contraction process to produce. So when motor neurons came with the signals, acetylcholine is released, action potential is generated. That action potential channelize the dihydroxypyridine receptor, and that receptor also conformational change to calcitonin receptor, which is present in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is a type of endoplasmic reticulum in cells. So this release the calcium, and that calcium goes to the filaments like actin and myosin. So the energy comes from high energy binds to the ATP molecule, which is degraded to adenosine diphosphate ADP to liberate the energy. So ATP is also needed for the cross bridge formation. So now we are going to understand the real mechanism how it is happen. So actin is constituted of the three main things. Like first is the tropomyosin, troponin, and F-actin. F-actin is the globular proteins which is the polymerized, and tropomyosin is surrounded by the actin. Troponin is also present, which binds the active site of the actin filaments. When calcium is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it binds to the actin's troponin, and troponin binds with calcium and opens the active site of the actin filaments. Myosin also thick filament which have the 4 light bands and 2 heavy bands, and forms the head-like structure, which in which have the ATPase present, which binds to the ATP and binds to the active site of the actin filament. And when it happens, cross bridge formation happens, and actin slides over the myosin. When this contraction happens, after that ATP is also needed to release that cross bridges, and they relaxed muscles. I hope you like my video. Thank you so much.